Hey everyone. I had another sort of interaction on social media today that inspired me to put up this video, and maybe it'll be of some use to some of you. And it's concerning, to some extent, the field of functional medicine, and to a greater degree, specific kinds of language that can be used by people who are influencers in the health, fitness, medicine, etc. kinds of fields, and or people who have a business to run where they're trying to sell something that relates to health or these other subject areas. Uh, Specifically, I was scrolling through my stories on Instagram and got hit with a targeted ad by a guy named Josh Axe. Dr. Axe, as he is often called, is a doctor of natural medicine and a doctor of chiropractic who also is a nutritionist. I believe he's certified as a nutritionist as well. And he's somebody who's well known in the functional medicine world. He's one of the biggest personalities in that world, depending on the site visit metrics you're looking at. The name is very well known. And he is somebody whom I've encountered in the past. Not personally, I don't think I've ever interacted with this person in a direct way, but I've encountered his name a lot in some of my work because, disclosure, some of the work I do is as a member of the teaching staff at a university that has a functional medicine program, and I work in that program. So there are people who may already be thinking about accusations of quackery or pseudoscience versus real science and all that. I'm not really here to discuss functional medicine as a field because that warrants its own separate video. If you would be interested in that, maybe I'll put something together. But suffice it to say, it's a more complicated discussion than I think a lot of people who would consider themselves evidence-based realize. So I can address that separately if you'd like. At any rate, I have encountered this Josh Axe guy before. Students who would tout his protocols and programs or his approaches or whatever. He's got a business to run, and he's advertising something. And in that advertisement, he was talking about things called gut destroyers. Now, this idea of a gut destroyer sounds really alarming and really compelling, maybe, to a lot of people. There are things I can eat that destroy my gut. And he gives a list of 10 items. And on the first slide, there's absolutely no nuance, there's no subtlety whatsoever. It's just a list of items underneath the label gut destroyers. I've got a screenshot of this. And I'll go through those items in a moment. And then on the following slide, he included a little bit more info, but it was basically stuff to funnel people to his website or to generate sales. I have a big issue with this kind of label, gut destroyers. There are very few things we do that will literally destroy any part of the body that we do in our day-to-day lives, because by definition, if we are actually destroying things, then we would cease to live, or at least cease to function in ways that are fundamental to just normal everyday life. So what were the items on this list? Number one, sugar. Not a specific kind, not under specific circumstances, just sugar. Well, we're consuming sugars all the time of varying kinds. Carbohydrates of all sorts are required for a lot of functions in the body, or at least are heavily favored for certain functions. I'm not going to get into a lengthy discussion of metabolism here, but anybody who knows anything about basic physiology should know this, and nutrition. So be careful when you encounter that. Number two, GMO, so genetically modified organisms. This is used a lot in the functional medicine world as sort of a dog whistle or sort of an alarmist kind of thing. Be scared of this. Now, in many cases, the claim is actually surrounding could be herbicides, things like Roundup, that are used in cultivating and raising and cultivating genetically modified crops. Of course, there are a lot of dubious arguments that get made around that, but it's not necessarily the GMO itself. It's how other stuff involved in its production that people often attach to it, whether that's fair to attach it or not. So be on the lookout for things like that. And additionally, GMO itself is it's not an ingredient. It's just a means of creating a genetic modification, as has been covered over the years, because this used to be a very popular point of argument for a lot of people. I was involved in a lot of these arguments years ago. Number 3, medications. Now, this is an interesting one. It just says medications. That's it. Okay, so each of these items is given no additional context or nuance in this image. Okay, now it is true that there are medications that can wreck certain mechanisms within the gut, certain digestive processes can be disrupted. Perhaps the most commonly discussed one would be antibiotics. For example, if you're put on broad spectrum antibiotics because you have maybe an extreme risk of infection, maybe you just underwent a very invasive major surgery, or you are immunocompromised and have other circumstances that, under the care and kind of guidance or supervision of a clinical team, it is decided that you need to take this preventative action, then yeah, you might be having to take something that can definitely cause a lot of damage there because it can wipe out a lot of the flora living in the gut. This is a real thing. This is not pseudoscience. However, when you just say medications, like as a broad label, I think that that's going to predispose people to being afraid of a lot of stuff that doesn't have any clear indication that it's going to cause gut damage. Now, this is an area of ongoing research, so I'm not trying to say that any research you happen to see on this stuff that says, hey, this could be harmful, is not to be trusted. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you lead with medications, like as a class, in an ad like this, you're promoting fear of an entire class of stuff, which I think is inappropriate, and I think it's not helping people. It's just creating an initial kind of fear avoidance sort of mentality, consciously or unconsciously, towards medications, just in general. I don't think that's a good thing. 4, vegetable oils. Again, no discussion of quantity. So I would be mindful of that. If you're going to be looking into evidence of varying qualities or levels of quality on how harmful this stuff can be for the gut, think about, well, what kind of vegetable oil are we talking about? There are different types that can be prepared in different ways. Are all of them harmful? Are we talking about a certain amount that you're taking in? And if so, are we taking it in a comparable amount to whatever it would be replaced with? That's another thing. When people tell you about these ingredients that are damaging or harmful or things to be scared of, they often have something to supplement it with. Either a behavioral intervention like, hey, here's my strategy, buy this from me, or here's my product I sell that happens to be healthier for you. So be on the lookout for that and think about those dosages, and then see if there's any evidence or any research on those things that they're trying to tell you to replace them with, and whether the evidence actually suggests that. Number 5, stress. Okay, now stress can absolutely impair a lot of functions from head to toe. But the thing is, how do you quantify stress? I mean, how much stress do you have to go through before it destroys your gut? So again, it's just one of these kind of broad, vague, catch-all kind of things that doesn't really help us in any meaningful way. Like, hey, avoid stress. Thanks for the tip, genius. Thanks, Doc. Number 6, sugar alcohols. Now, this gets back to something that has some meaningful, like, realistic implication in my mind. Sugar alcohols can cause irritation in the gut. I think I've seen some evidence that there can be disruption to certain species that live in the gut, at least with excessive intakes of sugar alcohols. But then again, excessive intakes of anything can cause all kinds of disruptions to all kinds of systems throughout the body. Most people don't seem to experience any problems, from anything I've seen, with moderate consumption of sugar alcohols or moderate consumptions of the kinds of foods that might contain them, which often, by the way, are foods that maybe they're sweets, maybe they're treat sort of things, or protein bars, or varieties of things that the person might be consuming as an alternative to something else that in other ways is far less healthy, either because it has a lot more fat in it or because it would have a lot more sugar in it and might have undesirable effects on their glycemic state depending on that person and how much they're taking in. So then you have to weigh that against this whole gut destruction sort of situation. Number 7, cleaners. I don't know what kind of cleaners Dr. Axe here is talking about, but I'm assuming you don't want to be consuming cleaners in your diet typically. Now, I'm being a little bit cute here. my assumption is that he's talking about exposure to it. Like if you were just breathing in a lot of cleaners or you're getting a lot of stuff on your skin, maybe it'll get in. But again, how much do you have to be exposed to? And what is the manner of that exposure? And what are the alternatives? If you're not using this horrible gut destroying cleaner, what are you going to replace it with? So, things to think about if you're going to encounter and look into the materials put out by somebody who has just this list of gut destroyers. Number 8, raw diet. Now, this is interesting because this is one where I think I might agree with him more in terms of definitely avoid this. You can definitely do a lot of damage to the body by consuming stuff that's raw, uh, depending on what that stuff is, right? If we're talking about, a raw vegetable that's fresh out of your garden and there aren't a lot of environmental pollutants to worry about or anything like that, you're probably going to be in decent shape, at least most of the time. If you're talking about eating raw eggs or consuming raw meat or undercooked meat, well, you might be asking for a salmonella infection. So good luck to your gut on that one. Or some kind of nasty parasite, for example. Again, that could be great for your gut. So, in many cases, yeah, a raw diet probably is not a good thing to consume or to pursue, at least not universally. Um, and funnily enough, I mentioned at the beginning of this that Dr. Axe is well known and kind of worshipped by a lot of people in the functional medicine world. And there are a lot of proponents of functional medicine who I would call kind of extremists are in the camp that you should eat a lot of stuff raw, or most or even all things raw. So it's funny that he's listing this as something that can wreck your gut when a lot of his fans might otherwise promote this, the raw diet. So hey, good on you, Dr. X, for maybe driving people away from eating a bunch of stuff raw. Of all of these items, I probably agree with him most so far on that one. Number 9, because we are counting up, there were 10 of these items. Number 9, chlorine and fluoride. Um, so this comes back to an issue I've seen in the functional medicine world where people get really obsessed over exposures to a singular thing and then they just dig up whatever evidence they can find on it. Often it's either epidemiological evidence that's confounded by a lot of other stuff. And I'm saying this with some understanding because I've worked in nutritional epidemiology in a nutritional epidemiology course for that functional medicine program I've worked in for the last 6 years. So either that, or it's really mechanistic stuff like in vitro research or stuff that's looking at very high level exposures to individual cells or in animals or something like that. Very little of the evidence that tends to get cited on this stuff is actually on humans and in a form where we can make causal inferences that are reliable. So, yeah, both chlorine and fluoride generally seem to fall under that umbrella. Now, I'm not saying it can't cause harm. I'm not saying any of these things can't possibly cause harm. I'm saying that when you're being very alarmist by leading with it and labeling it as a gut destroyer, you're creating issues because you're probably promoting a lot of irrational fear, not rational assessment of risks. There are risks associated with just about anything that a person could eat, drink, do, but we should keep these things in proper perspective. Keep it all in scale. So I'm not going to speak anymore right now about chlorine and fluoride, except to say that these are things that I've encountered before. Often, by the way, I will add this: people are railing against the inclusion of chlorine as as an agent in pool water and other sterilization sort of techniques or exposure to things like chlorine bleach. Of course, you don't want to do too much of that. There are some weirdos out there who've promoted things like bleach consumption and enemas and all kinds of craziness. Yeah, don't do that. Definitely don't consume this stuff directly in excess or in any meaningful amount if you can avoid it. Fluoride, often people are talking about fluoridated water, and there are lots of dubious claims about that, but I've yet to see anything particularly compelling that suggests that we have to really be on the lookout for fluoride as a major issue. By the way, what was attached to a lot of these on the second slide that followed the initial slide was that a lot of these are endocrine disruptors, which is another kind of scare term. I'm not saying that things can't disrupt endocrine function. In many cases, though, they're using excessive amounts in animal studies and then saying, oh, look, this messes up the endocrine function of this creature. Well, yeah, if If you dump a lot of any kind of chemical into a body that is beyond a physiologic amount, you can expect to see disruption of various things, including endocrine function. You shine a light on it brightly enough, you're going to find what you're looking for. Okay, and then the 10th item on this list, dairy and wheat. Those are put together for some reason. I don't know why dairy and wheat are attached like that, but that's the 10th item. That includes an insane amount of food and a tremendous amount of drink that we consume. Now, there are cases in which dairy and wheat can cause problems, and not just in people who, for example, are lactose intolerant or who have celiac disease. It is broader than that, okay? Don't come after me with pitchforks, evidence-based people who think I'm being a pseudoscientist by saying that. There are nuances to this. There are fringe details, and there are additional cases to consider. There are gray areas, clinically speaking, that we're still working on, okay? And you can be rational about that and look at the research and say, oh, okay, it looks like there are additional issues here. It's not clinically defined as such, but there's something going on. You can use your brain and come to those conclusions. I'm not saying you can't. But to say that dairy and wheat are gut destroyers is absurd. Absolutely absurd. I shouldn't even have to speak about it more than that. So just be mindful of these kinds of things. Now, I went longer with this video than I intended, and I hope that's not a problem. But I just wanted to list off these 10 items and mention that, again, this stuff, none of these items should inherently be feared. How they are consumed, or if they're consumed at all, when we're talking about like cleaning products, the quantities in which they're consumed, the forms they are in when they're taken into the body, what specifically we're talking about. These are things that matter. These factors are important. So keep that in mind. And if you're going to encounter these kinds of claims and you do want to dive down the rabbit hole and look at what so-and-so's protocol is, okay, go for it. However, if a person's using a bunch of scare tactics to advertise something to you, consider that they're probably trying to get your money. They're probably trying to get you eventually to buy something. Whenever you look at these ads on Facebook, on Instagram, on social media, or anywhere else, look to see if there's like a sales funnel attached to it. Look to see if there's a, hey, click here to learn more, and then if you click that link, you're almost immediately met with something to buy. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's just getting the foot in the door. Do they want you to buy something from them? Is it a supplement? Is it some kind of a protocol? Is it some kind of educational program? Is it a certification on how to avoid all of these scary things? Look closely, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, keep your thinking cap on. It may or may not look like this. And just try not to be fooled, try not to be exploited, okay? Now, I've gone way too long, I apologize here. If anybody's interested in further thoughts on that whole functional medicine thing and my background with it, or thoughts on what it is and what it isn't, then they would not be the opinions of any organization I work for. They would just be kind of my general take based on my observations. I can maybe do a video on that if you want. Otherwise, I just wanted to share this. I don't like this Dr. Axe guy in terms of what he's put out. I don't know him as a person, but I can't respect the practices here. These scare tactics, in my mind, have no place among self-respecting, honorable professionals when it comes to educators, clinicians, health professionals, etc. We should be doing better. So be on the lookout for that. Be careful of these kinds of people or of these kinds of practices. All right. I'm out.